Hi there. My name's Rob MacDonald, and I practice as a registered psychologist here in Cold Lake. I work for addiction and mental health. I have a bit of a pastoral background, and I have a little private practice here in town as well. What we're trying to do here is create some tools for our community that maybe would help us sort of manage our own internal and behavioral worlds in the middle of what is amounting to be quite the difficult circumstances for you, for all of us. I want to offer a few short videos on how we could cultivate emotional, mental, behavioral practices in the midst of this really extremely challenging season. So to start off, today I want to just give a little bit of an overview, kind of a taste of kind of where we might be able to go, and then go from there. As this crisis has evolved, as a people, we've had to adapt to significant collective changes that have happened with astonishing speed. So much has changed for us. At the start, I know for myself, I was aware, and to varying degrees, of how this virus was spreading worldwide, how it was impacting various countries. I took a little bit of comfort that it wasn't quite into Canada yet, that it was somewhere else, and that it was something I could pay attention to, but it wasn't totally impacting me yet. And then we had our first cases in Canada, we had our first cases in our province, we had a declaration of a pandemic that resulted in a surge in panic buying and a lot of anxiety and fear in our people. And then came these various rollouts of containment measures by our federal, provincial, local governments, done in some steps, kind of all at once, but certainly in quick succession. And I think a lot of us initially, we found ourselves doing a lot of searching, a lot of paying attention to all the information that was coming out, trying to get a handle on the way this was going to change everything around us, trying to work out a strategy for adopting to this change, trying to figure out how this was going to change and how we were going to adapt to it. And then we've had to adapt and change on multiple fronts at the same time. We've had to change personal behaviors. We've had to engage in this thing called social distancing, isolation measures for some of us, the canceling of everything, how to adjust to changes in the way we gain income, educational changes, childcare changes, social norms changing, all of it all at once. And most of it with a deep sense of foreboding as to what this all means. It's been a tsunami of change for most people, and has varied from just merely inconvenient for some to a serious threat to the health and well-being for others. And we've been in this stage of adjusting to significant and serious changes for, in my specific context here, for about a month. And while there is probably more change to come, most of us have had a chance now to start looking ahead at what's to come, what this is going to look like, and having to, again, adapt to some pretty scary realities. And it kind of seems to me at this stage we're in a bit of a maintenance stage. And being in a maintenance stage has its own challenges. Most have had time now to think and reflect more on what all this means, because initially we focus on the immediate, the acute, what needs to be done right now. And most of us make some adjustments that way, and you can make those changes. But after a while, you realize that there are a new set of tasks and challenges related to sustainability. How long can you sustain these things? How long can you sustain these changes? And so now we need to start thinking of what new sets of behaviors do we need to employ to help us navigate this next stage of holding on for an unknown period of time. So what are the mental, behavioral habits that we need to develop to sustain all this longer term? Now, because initially we get by on that comforting delusion a little bit that these measures are temporary, but eventually you have to square with the facts that we're into a new normal. And for now, we kind of cling to the hope that this is not going to last years, but more months. But as we've all seen, a lot of this is very undetermined and undefined. So I have a few observations of some of the emotional conditions that a lot of us are facing. And then I want to focus and offer a few thoughts on how we could manage our inner and behavioral selves, hopefully a bit better. So first up, a lot of people have mentioned, a lot of people are saying, and a lot of people are talking about stress and anxiety. And certainly that has been an absolute reality for a lot of us. But I want to differentiate those two for a second, because stress and anxiety are different, and they're controlled in different ways. So first of all, stress, it's a natural function that alerts us to danger and threat and primes us to respond. Now, too little stress and you underreact. You do nothing. You make no changes. You pretend there is no threat. And too much stress, you overreact. Maybe you go panic shop, or you stay on high alert for too long, or you consume media incessantly, or you start to make really poor decisions. So stress can be helpful, and it's necessary because it helps us to prepare, to organize, to reallocate resources. It helps us to determine essential functions from non-essential, and it's meant to be short-term. And when it lasts too long or is too intense, we start to face breakdown. We slide into inaction, sometimes indecision or panic, and all, of course, the health implications of having your body be on high alert for too long. So stress, though, is also related to particular situations and problems. So here's an example. You may need to go grocery shopping, but you're scared to do so. That's stress, because there's a particular problem to solve, and it's yours to solve. You might be a business owner facing significant or total revenue drops, and you have employees you know you're going to have to lay off. That's stress, because those are problems you have to face, and you're probably going to have to face them soon. You might be someone who's facing a layoff yourself, wondering how you're going to pay bills. That's stress regarding problems that you have to face and face soon. Maybe you're a parent facing the daunting challenge of home-based education. That's stress you feel as you try and figure out what needs to be done and when and how to do all that. So that's stress. It's a natural function. It's supposed to be there. It helps us navigate some of these really difficult situations, as long as we manage and control it and keep it in a window of usefulness and helpfulness. Too little, it's not helpful. Too much, it's not helpful. So how's that different from anxiety? Well, anxiety employs all the same physiological, cognitive, emotional high alert systems that we have, that we're equipped with as human beings, that help us respond to threat and to danger in the absence of actual threat and danger. So anxiety thrives on the what-if scenarios that plague us. So when they are attached to, what-if scenarios, when attached to problems outside our control, are particularly wicked in their impact on us. It's things like, what if the price of oil stays the way it is? What if my family members get sick? What if the world stays in a pandemic state for more than a few months? What if all this was some intentional act by some nefarious conspirator meant to destroy the world? That's where anxiety thrives. And the main goal of anxiety is to drive you ever more inward and drive you to employ increasingly irrational behaviors and thought processes to make you feel like you have some control over the unknowns that surround us. We've got a lot of unknowns around here, and a lot of it has to do with the potential for facing things alone. And I want to get into that a little bit later in terms of our social connectedness. But anxiety is all about those worries, those fears that are possible, plausible, maybe and then eventually irrational. But stress is more related to something actual and in front of you that you have to face. So I want to talk about, eventually as we go along here, sort of the different ways that we sort of manage these two things internally and externally. I want to move on. Grief. Now, grief is the next thing that I want to talk about, because I've noticed it's come up a lot lately. Grief is a natural response to loss. And we've faced losses on multiple fronts lately, some of which only becoming clearer the longer we go. So initially, kids facing the loss of being around family and friends from school, the canceling of everything, not being able to go to church anymore, not being able to go out anymore, not being able to stop in on family and neighbors, not being able to go to your favorite park. All the no longer able tos that we're gradually becoming aware of. There's bigger losses too, like a loss of a sense of security, a sense of direction, potentially the ability to provide for your family. Those are all losses that now need to be grieved. And the problem is we're typically and generally pretty poor at grieving well. We tend towards minimization and pretending losses don't affect us, and distraction, just kind of getting on and doing something else and not really paying attention to it. And when you move logically, the next one after grief is depression. Another feeling, another condition that we may be experiencing in all of this. Depression is that all-encompassing condition that not only impacts how we think about ourselves and the world by only being able to see through negative and catastrophic lenses, but it impacts our decision-making ability, our sleep, our eating, our motivation, our mood, our relationships, everything. You might find yourself listless and prone to endless scrolling, or irritable with no patience anymore. Depression is different than grief, though, because grief is focused on the object of loss, while depression is focused on the self. In grief, your self-esteem, your self-concept, who you are, is maintained. The agony is over the loss, while in depression, the focus is on self-loathing, self-hatred, self-condemnation, and how you're worth less than others. And so depression also brings around that sense of being overwhelmed, where you can't prioritize anything as everything seems important, and so you can't make decisions anymore, so it kind of grinds you to a bit of a halt. So that's a primer on sort of depression. And then the next one that and the last one that I want to highlight is that once we hit a maintenance stage in a crisis like this, we now have time and energy to figure out who's to blame. And so things like anger and blame start to rise to the fore. We want to figure out who's to blame, who started this calamity. And we reach out with anger and indignation. And we start thinking like, if only Trump or Trudeau or the Chinese had done X, Y, Z, we wouldn't be here. If our leaders were more competent, things would be different. So you have this pent-up energy that all of a sudden finds that it needs to go somewhere. And it often finds release in things like political discourse, but it also, closer to home, anger at someone who brings their kids to the grocery store, even though you have no idea what the circumstances were around that. Anger at the choices your employer has made. Irritability with the kids or the pets or whatever. And so when you have this initial scrambling of adapting to a crisis, when that fades, anger tends to rise to the surface and look for an outlet. And we need to be aware of that and prepared for it, and instead find ways that are healthy to funnel that energy into doing things, into engaging in positive action that helps others, not attacks others, and helps ourselves sort of be able to start with a bit of expression. So over the next while, we want to develop a bit of a series that tackles each of these in a little more depth. I want to provide some practical tips on managing any or all of these emotional states as they arise for us. And each of them demands a certain amount of intentionality around what we allow ourselves to think about, how we acknowledge and accept what we feel, and what kind of behaviors are either life-giving or life-draining. What kinds of things we do with our physical selves to help us cope better, and what can be done spiritually as well, all to induce growth and flourishing instead of distress and anguish. There's changes that we can make on all of those fronts to make this whole situation better, or at least manageable, or induce growth and flourishing. Now, one big idea to take away from today's little talk is this. Where your energy and focus goes, that's what you'll cultivate and get more of. So if you want to feel more stressed, more anxious, more depressed? You need to search out and feed yourself with a never-ending stream of terrible news from across the world. You want to post rants on social media about everybody else. You want to share articles that denigrate any and everyone about how this whole thing is going. And just to ramp up your fear and highlight our vulnerabilities, that's entirely possible if that's what you want to focus on. You'll get more of that. However, you can feed life and vitality by focusing on things like actions you can control, becoming aware of your emotional state and finding healthy means of expressing them, engaging in like physical, tangible projects that you can pull together your mind and body. We can engage in social acts that are now more important than ever. Things like spending time hugging and cuddling your loved ones if you have that luxury at this point. Focus on playing games, reading with each other and children, even remotely. That's possible. We need to create opportunities for expression, art, music, whatever you can think of to express what it is that you're facing and what it is you're feeling. We can post and share encouragements rather than get everybody down with your particular axe to grind. So today, my emphasis here is that we focus on what's in your control, that we focus on trusting God with the outcomes of the tough decisions we have to make. There's a ton of things going on at the moment that you can't control, that we have no agency over. And we need to acknowledge those, lay them aside, and focus on that which we can. So focus on sharing your concerns and your fears with others. Focus on staying present rather than numbing out and staring off into space, or burying your head too long in your phone, or using drugs or alcohol to avoid your inner state. We need to, and I want to teach and show this more as we go, we need to learn how to calm and soothe our physical self, because that's really important when it comes to all this. So we want to learn simple breathing, calming techniques, because if your inner self is worked up, anxious and angry, that comes out physically. And so we can start there, sort of backing that up. We want to take responsibility for those inner states and learn how to manage them well, instead of taking it all out on others. And then we want to focus on the important things that this time and this circumstance has forced most of us to discern. So in short, what thoughts, behaviors, information streams, relationships are life-giving right now? And which ones are life-sucking for you? We need to develop healthy mind and body habits now more than ever, and I hope to dive into some of that more in the our coming talks. So thank you for listening, for being a part of this, and keep on searching for the beautiful, the humorous, and the meaningful. We're all going to need more and more of that as these days go on.